Yes.
We should mute everybody.
Yeah, you can do
Aside
that
from
too,
Lenny.
Jordan. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Let me see.
Yeah.
And you can unmute yourselves to speak. Mute all.
Mariana.
Yes. Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah. So if you want to take it from here.
All right. So am I unmuted now?
Yes, but you can unmute. You're unmuted. You're fine.
Okay, good. Because I just unmuted myself.
Yeah, good. We need you.
Are you going to give your own introduction, Lenny? I know that's good. Chawky already gave
Yes, I am.
the greatest
let me go ahead
introduction.
and let me go ahead and
pin
share
you.
my.
I'm going to pin you then.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen.
Great.
All right. So, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So I have a lot of slides in here, so I'm going to start talking. And I being of Cuban ancestry, but only on my mother and father's side, I will tell everyone a little bit about me. Hopefully, discuss a bit about the DC art scene. First of all, thank you to Jordan and Mariana for inviting me to participate. The dissemination of knowledge, I think, about anything, but specifically about art, is a very, very valuable and key thing. And I've been here for a long time and made every mistake that could possibly be made and learned from every one of them. But today, by the end of today, you'll hopefully learn a little bit more about me and all of those things that I have listed in there. One thing that those of you that know me well know is that I am not sort of a shy person. So in fact, quite the opposite. So hopefully you can, we can all live with that. I was born in Santiago, which is the capital of the easternmost province of Cuba, but I was raised in Guantanamo, which of course is famous because there's the US Naval Base in there, blah, blah, blah. Came from a family of immigrants. I like to tell my children that we Campellos are kind of serial immigrants because my grandparents all immigrated, left the Canary Islands, Sicily, and the northern mountains of Iberia and Spain for Cuba, and then my parents left for the United States. Hopefully, it'll stop with me and my kids, but these days sometimes I'm not so sure. We unlike a lot of Cuban Americans that came in the early 60s, we ended up in Brooklyn because my aunt and uncle have been living there since the 40s, and they owned a brownstone where we all ended up living. So we were designated back in those days as political refugees. I went to high school. Oh, by the way, this photograph, I'm somewhere in there. These are the Cuban kids that were photographed on the airplane that we flew from Varadero Beach in Cuba to Miami. No one has ever been able to figure out of those which one it's me. I think it might be that head right there, either that one or potentially.
Lenny, I'm sorry, can you progress the slide? Because we're seeing the first one.
Oh, it's showing on mine.
Okay.
Try it again. Did it show now?
No.
Or it's not progressing. Interesting. Okay, there's going to be an issue, as the British say then, because that was an embedded slide. You're still seeing the first one?
Yes.
Huh. Yeah, I'm seeing the third iteration of the slide. Oh, it says your screen sharing is paused.
Oh.
That's probably why. Okay, let me back up and then unpause it. Yeah, it paused my screen share. Resume share. Here we go.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thank you.
All right, so it resumed it, hopefully?
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Can you see that?
Wait, there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sharing. Are you seeing is anybody seeing the photograph of a bunch of kids?
Yes.
Okay, I was saying people think that I'm either this guy here or that guy there, but I'm not. But those are all the little Cuban kinder who were on that flight. A lot of them looking all very slightly worried.
I see.
I discovered at one time when I was stationed in Europe that in the Navy, later on you'll find out about the Navy, but that's supposedly our family crest. I really don't think so, but anyway. And, you know, a variation, I warn you guys, you know, I'm going to be talking really fast because, you know, I can't keep calm. Because genetically speaking, best-selling T-shirt in the House of Guayaberas, which started as a little shop in Calle Ocho in Havana, and is now a block long. It almost closed during COVID, but this is kind of like the way we feel. All right. I wanted to show, this is a big influence on my artwork, and I think on every artist, you should all get influenced by the places you live. And when I started assembling this a while back, I was like almost in shock how many different places I lived in, including a place that's very familiar to my friend Chawky, because that's where he's from the country, from Lebanon. But I spent about, almost a year of my life. These are significant places in Beirut and also in nearby Haifa. And that's a picture of me in the middle with the cigar and the beer, surrounded by a couple of Marines when we had a presence at the airport there in the mid 80s. All right, so I went to high school in Long Island City, Aviation High School. I enlisted in the Navy when I was 17. I was commissioned when I was 25 years old. The Navy no longer has beards, so every time a Navy guy sees this, they all get very jealous. That's my father. He's the big guy here driving the Jeep. My father worked for years at the naval base in Guantanamo. And in a weird, interesting way, even though he was never officially part of the US Navy, I think it still provides a bit of linkage. And that was the last ship that I served in the Navy, USS Virginia, appropriately. And it's now razor blades, sold all over the place. It's been decommissioned for a long time. When I was in the Navy, I used to do all kinds of interesting things like these cartoons think about this, you know, I was 17, 18, 19. Most of these were published in various newspapers and things at the time, but it kind of fed the, you know, in a weird way, fed my hunger for doing artwork. They were all supposed to be slightly funny. Most of them were published like this in the Stars and Stripes newspaper. I don't even know this newspaper still exists. I was selected for a commissioning program. I had an appointment to the Naval Academy. Shirley Chisholm was my Congress person at the time from Brooklyn. She's a historical congresswoman. I believe she was the first African-American woman to be elected to Congress. I declined the academy because I was selected to go to a different school. And I received a phone call from her that I still remember because she chewed my ass sideways and leftwards about declining the academy. But I still turned it down. And this is me when I was in art school back at in Seattle between 1977 and 1981. I went there because I wanted to study under this guy. That's the drawing that I did of him. That's Jacob Lawrence, arguably one of the greatest artists of the 20th century in the United States. And him and I became really, really good friends because he had lived in New York for a long time in his youth as well. This is my School of Art, University of Washington. And no, the Navy did not pay for me to go to art school. I actually had a scholarship. The Navy did pay for me to get a degree in math. When I graduated, because I was going to be a cryptologist, when I graduated, the school told me that I was the first student in the entire history of the school to get a double degree in math and art. The two usually don't line up too often. I applied to art school with this piece. This is a piece drawn called Isla Balsera, or Boat Island, or Raft Island. And it was using I was at the time stationed in San Diego. It was using the July 4th, 1976 issue of the San Diego newspaper. It was the bicentennial issue. And this piece is now in the collection of American University. They got it as a gift from a collector that bought it from me in the 1970s, late 70s. And the piece is called Happy Bicentennial America, Wishing We Were There. And then when I was in art school, I believe for a while that I thought I was the only Cuban in the entire state of Washington. I wasn't, I'm sure, but I did a lot of pieces like this dealing with my homeland. I put this one specifically up there because I still have this note where my art professor liked it. Professor Lawrence was curating a show, and he has suggested that I translate the writing on the thing. At the time, I remember I was a bit pissed off about it because I didn't want to, you know, I was a young man, but I ended up doing it, translating it, and it was good because somebody bought that. I have no idea where it is now. I did a lot of artwork dealing with that sort of thinking back in art school. These pieces, I don't want to say I've forgotten about them, but a lot of them have resurfaced in the last 10 years or so. There's a new museum in Miami called the American Museum of the Cuban Diaspora, and they own a couple of them, which makes me feel really good. This piece I did back, one of the last one was in homage to Cuban Jews. Cuba was an accepting place back in the 20s and 30s. The second oldest synagogue in the New World is in Havana. So there's always been Cuban Jews in Cuba, but they, during the pre-World War II and after after as soon as my art school assignments were graded, they were up for sale. And it was interesting. Also interesting, my wife noted yesterday that my sweater is tucked in. I reminded her it was 1977. So, you know, boo. These are some of the artwork that I did. I probably get in trouble for calling that gentleman there wino, but this is Wino Girl reading a newspaper at the bridge there in Pike Place Market. People from the market. These sketches, this stuff being sold at the market, jeweler from the back. Then I got commissioned, went to a ship. I did a tour in a ship. Then I got stationed in Rota, Spain. And of course I started doing, and another point here is that I believe artists always kind of get influenced by where they live and what's around them and what happens. So Spain had a lot of nude beaches. So a lot of these came out. They also had a lot of these. So I was fascinated. The little village that I lived had a gigantic convent. So there were a lot of sisters walking around. After that, another ship. Then I was stationed in Scotland, and I lived in this house, which I did a drawing of. It's called Little Kitak Farmhouse. It was built in 1507. So, and it had a lot of ghosts. I never saw any of them, but my daughters swear, and everybody knew that all these old houses in Scotland were pretty ghostly. One of the most beautiful places in the world that I've ever lived in. I enjoyed it. That's me trying to straighten out a stone standing stone, and that was about maybe quarter of a mile from the house, just screwing around. I was surrounded by bees everywhere that you go in Scotland. There's more sheep than Scots. So again, I think artists do what's around them, right? So I have did a lot of drawings and paintings of sheep. I have never ever in my entire life since I left Scotland done another one. But I'm glad that they happened when they were there, because now they're a record. These also show up at auctions and things like that, secondary market, mostly in Britain, because that's where a lot of them went. A lot of these things, I had never seen this in my life, but apparently that's farmers immediately will know what that is, right? I was fascinated by them. The Northern Lights, I painted them a lot. This is right outside our house. They happen, you know, constantly up there. The first time I saw it being from Brooklyn, I kind of thought it was like some sort of a light show that was fake. Scotland has the most beautiful landscapes. Again, ever since I left Scotland, have never done another landscape pretty much in my entire life. But while I was there, same thing with these spectacular skyscapes. All work that these guys are actually a pain in the tuchus, because they really screw up a lot of the lakes. But it gave me a chance to learn and experiment with a lot of wet and wet techniques and things of that sort. This arch, this is the village, the nearest village to where I live. This was built in the 1800s to welcome Queen Victoria when she visited Scotland for the first time. And for some reason, I was fascinated by it and did it over and over and over. Artists know that children, Jordan, I'm sure you know this, children, this is my daughter, Elise. I often, the best models, you know, and all through my life, that's Elise again. She now has 2 kids of her own that I've already drawn a few times. This is my son. I did a whole series on eyes. My son, Anderson, my other daughter, the elder daughter, Vanessa, and we'll come back to this broken bisque that she's drawn on, because that's kind of the latest kind of work that I've been doing. My son, Anderson, who's currently in a swim competition here. And that's him again. All right. So then I retired from the Navy, stayed here in the DC area, and I started doing these. These are outdoor art shows. That's my booth. This is between maybe 1992 to maybe the year 2000 or so. For about 10 years, I did these. I still do them once in a while because they're kind of a lot of fun and they sort of refresh you. This is what I call the battlefront of the art world. This is essentially a booth, an artist, and the public. I did a lot of these dark drawings. By the way, the Washington art scene, these are the drawings that I was doing at the time. The Greek called this horror vacui, right? Fear of empty space, where everybody was always asking me, oh, you know, how do you like start blacking it? I could never get away without drawing the entire figure, then filling it in. I could never figure out the rest of the process. So, you know, it would have been so much time saver if I could have just drawn those lines, but I tried, don't get me wrong, because, you know, everybody tries shortcuts, right? But it didn't work. I've always been obsessed by certain icons. Everybody that knows me a little bit deep knows that the Washington Post in the 90s in an article about my work said I was a Frida-phile. Even before people knew who Frida. Marilyn's another one of them, but there's Frida, and people always filled in. Frida and Marilyn at the Jerry Springer show. A lot of people are too young to know who Jerry Springer was, probably, but I try to introduce a lot of humor in my art whenever possible. So this is Frida, and I don't know if people remember the talk to the hand thing that used to happen back then. This is Fidel Castro as a Sephardic Jew, and this is my vision in the 90s of Castro discovering Castro's mother's last name was Ruz, R-U-Z, which is a very, very, very famous name in northern Spain for a Jewish family that was forced to convert in medieval times. And so I put the old Galician there in his later days, being sorry for all the really mean stuff that he did to Cuban Jews when he was the dictator. I also did a lot of work, this sort of, again, dark, and I'm highlighting this whole darkness thing because you'll see what this eventually evolves to. But anyway, let's go back just a little tiny bit. For those of you that are young enough, I know Yolanda, who I see has just started doing this. One of my favorite ways to really, if you're out there, to expose your work, and like I say, I still do it, is the outdoor art shows. And we are lucky enough in this area to have 3 or 4 of the highest ranked outdoor art shows. Essentially, an artist, a booth, artwork, 20, 30, 40,000 people strolling by, so it's numbers, and the financial sort of demographics to give artists a good exposure to people who are potentially buying art. So if you have the time and the desire to, I highly recommend it. In 1996, we opened our first gallery. This is the Fraser Gallery, which I opened with my then wife, Kate. It was 400 square feet in Georgetown. At that point, there were 7 art galleries in that square, which is the Canal Square at 31st Street and M Street. The last time that I went there during sort of walking around during COVID, everything was boarded up. So I haven't been back there in a while, so I don't know. But even before COVID, I think that we were down to like maybe 3 or 4 galleries in that space area. And when we opened that, everybody said, oh, galleries have the worst business to open. I'll give you guys 6 months, specifically because we were focusing on what we call contemporary realism. So they said, we'll give you guys 6 months. We became one of the more successful galleries in the DC area. And in 2002, we opened a second gallery in Bethesda. At the time, this gallery was the largest art gallery in the DC region. Also did really well. And both galleries closed. I divorced in 2005. Both galleries closed in 2009 and went strictly online. And I'll discuss more about that in a little bit. Went online because in 2005, the Fraser Gallery did the first one of these. These are art fairs. The phenomenon started around 2003 or so, these gigantic art fairs based on Art Basel model in Switzerland. And right now, about 20 to 25% of the art sold in the world on planet Earth gets sold in the Miami area in the first week in December during what's called Art Basel Week, which is 22 or 23 art fairs in there. This is what a booth looks like at an art fair. So this booth, I think this is art. This is a Texas contemporary art, which is one of the lesser ones. So this booth is probably $16,000, and it's probably, that back wall is probably 18 feet by 10 feet or something, or maybe 20 by 10. So they're pricey, but they bring collectors to one spot. This is what it looks like before. It's a lot of work, by the way. All of that has to be shipped to it, so there's all kind of associated expenses. And this is another example of one. This is in Miami at I think this was Context Art Miami. In 2011, I did this undertaking. I worked with 100 artists of Washington, D.C., and created this book, which highlighted 100 DC area artists. It has done really well, surprisingly enough. And for one glorious day, it was the best-selling art book on Amazon. And the publisher has been after me for the last few years to come up with a second volume here, which I am thinking about maybe next year. We'll see, of doing it. All right, this is sort of my current work. If you notice, I'm still sort of now, instead of horror vacui, is like the opposite, you know. When my son was about 7 or 8 years old, he used to look at these and go, "Hey, Dad, when are you going to finish that drawing?" But I'm really interested in having the empty space being part of it. Reintroduced color to my artwork. For years and years, I was just a black and white work. These tattoos, I go back to places you live. These tattoos were, I learned them and found them in the original people of Scotland. The Scots originally came from Spain. From Spain, they went to Ireland in 451 AD. From Ireland, they started invading Scotland. By the year 700 or so, they had pretty much taken over from the local people who were called Picts by the Romans, or Picti, painted. And these tattoos are Pictish tattoos. So 25 years later, they kind of resurface in my artwork. I also do a lot of work embedded in where technology is embedded into the work. This is the Batman brooding. The stuff that you see in the back in there is a written language that I created. As a Navy cryptologist, I married two things. I married Ogham writing, which is a Celtic form of writing using a line, and a Navy verbal code called the Falcon Code. There's writing on the wall that is double encrypted, and this particular one says "Missing Robin." Navy guys, if they teach themselves how to read Ogham, they'll be able to break it. They know how to break it. There it appears again. This is a piece that's me, and that's my father in the embedded screen. To the left is me running in my grandfather's farm in Guantanamo, and the writing in the background says Cuba. This is one of the pieces of mine. This one has a hidden spy camera. So what this lady's doing, which fascinates me, is that she's taking a picture of herself in the artwork, which is the artwork is supposed to be about, is a woman in a gallery of portraits. And it's the piece is called Your Portrait in a Gallery of Portraits. Everybody else is like super famous, and then you see yourself, and people love taking pictures in there. These are pieces along the same series. Then more recently, I've sort of started drawing on broken bisque. Those of you from the DC area know there's a gallery here called the Joe and Hisaka Gallery. It's part of the Healing Center, the Smith Healing Center here in Washington. Once a year they have a show. It's a fundraiser, and they give everybody a bowl, and you do whatever you want in there, and then it's sold at auctions. Artists do all kinds of amazing things, dioramas, sculptures, and things. And for years, I had been doing a drawing and then mailing it back to them. One year, Right Broken, they called me. They said, "Hey, your piece of Right Broken, come pick up another bowl." I drove up, picked up another bowl, and then it sat in my studio, also known as the laundry room in our house, for maybe 2 years. And then one day I opened the boxes and needed it to ship something else, and I found the broken piece again, and I fell in love with it. So then I started buying the piece directly, the pieces. They're not cheap either, and breaking them. And it was so frustrating because you drop them for like a foot from the ground and they would bounce, and then you drop them from like 12 inches from the ground and they would break into a trillion pieces. And so you know, and the piece has to be interesting and big enough, right? To be able to accept the drawing. And one day my wife says, why don't you call the company that makes them, which is in Baltimore, and see what if they have any broken pieces they can just save for you. So I called them. I said, what a good idea. I called them. And the nice lady says, oh, sure, we'll start saving them for you. But I warn you, we don't break them very often. I said, that's okay, I'll wait. And like, 2 days later, they called me. I drove up, they had like 200 pounds of broken stuff. So now I get them for free. But what I do is every time I go pick up stuff from them, I bring them a few free pieces, and now their entire office is lined up for them from with the work. They're such nerds too, because like you bring them this piece or something or that one, and somebody will go, oh, that's mold X43. I'm like, oh man, okay. So this is what it looks like before they go to an art fair. And I price these really affordable, I think. And like, I just came from the Volta Art Fair in New York, and I sold 7 years. So one lesson I learned selling that student work at the Pike Place Market is that to this day and now, and I know most of you will reflect on this and agree, I think, is that to me still such an honor all these years later when somebody puts out their hard-earned money just to buy a piece of artwork that's just going to give visual pleasure and and hang it in the wall. With this work, because some of it is so affordable, I'm getting a lot of people that go, wow, this is the first piece of art I have ever bought in my life. And that makes me feel really good. This is kind of what they look like. It's just essentially very sharp charcoal pencil. The material has a really, really good tooth. I've recently switched from charcoal pencil to graphite, really hard graphite pencil. And then I use a tortillon to blend them to sort of get the, a little bit better definition in them. A lot of these models, not the nude ones, but a lot of these models come from people that go to the art fairs that I take pictures, usually from the back, so they don't, whatever, and I use them sort of as unwitting models. Always Frida. All right, so what's next for me? And don't be afraid, I have a few more slides because I want to talk about a bit more. I just the opening, everybody's invited at the Katzen Museum. They're going back to full openings. Maryland, and there's Lucy and Desi that I did maybe in 2012. I learned an interesting lesson from this. The one thing that I have not been very good at over the years is really keeping good track of who buys my artwork. And it was interesting, when they went through the work that I had over the years, when they asked to review images, and I had no idea where about 3/4 of them were. At one point they were recorded somewhere who bought it, obviously, but I had no idea. So I never sort of centralized that. Now, part of that is the fact that I have sold a lot of work since 1977. So, unlike lesser amount of people, lesser amount of sales, sorry, or placing. And when I say placing, is because I got to tell you, I also traded artwork, I've given away artwork, but I want to say it's probably more like in the thousands rather than the tens or the hundreds since then, especially at the outdoor art sales fairs that I did in the 90s. And now, now I'm moving 30, 40, 50 of those small bisque drawings over a 4 or 5 day art fair, in addition to 5 or 6 large pieces. I'll be back in New York for the Affordable Art Fair, which I've been now doing since 2005. They do it twice a year. And I've applied to those 2 fairs in Miami. They're both very, very, very difficult to get into. The art fairs are juried, and both of those are pretty much at the top of the art fair food chain. By the way, if anybody has any questions as I go along. Okay, so the next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit, just go over it, things that I think should be important to artists is, and I'm not going to dwell a lot on this, but that I've discovered over the years, right? There's a lot of artists in there that this is not going to be any news to, but it should be important to pretty much all of them. It's the fact that that people that buy your artwork, generally speaking, may not be aware of some of these things, but the real savvy collectors and the good collectors are, right? So the presentation of the artwork counts a lot, right? It's the tactics for learning how to present the work are not that difficult. This is also a paid advertising for a free, because somebody else pays for it, seminar that I do called Boot Camp for Artists. I've been doing it since 1996, I believe was the first one. And I know it's a couple of you that are listening that have signed up for it. It's about 6-7 hours where I discuss all of this in depth in those. But so for talking to the audience here, I wanted to highlight a few things to ensure that there's things that we do not do. So please, your buyer can do anything they want with your work, right? But please don't use color mats, acidic mats. At some point retire the frame. You don't know what I do with my frames that are all busted up and not for maybe from doing it. So what I do is I take the frame and I'll go into my flat files and I find a piece of artwork that's maybe been hanging around for a long time. Usually stuff maybe from art school. So because I still have some of that, right? Usually some assignment or newsprint or whatever. I drop it into that scratch frame, put it back in there, reframe it, and then I drive it up to a, and donate it to a thrift shop someplace. And sure as heck, usually like 3-4 days later, I get an email saying, "Hey, I just bought this at such and such for $3. Is that your work?" And part of me makes me feel good because somebody just got an original piece of art that they go online and they see somebody that actually it's an artist, and it makes me feel good to know now that busted up scratch frame that is not good enough for an art fair was good enough for somebody to have an original piece of artwork in their house. I'm not a big fan of huge signatures or using a gold, silver, or any other fill in the blank color to sign stuff. Those copyright notations, you don't need them any longer from the visual arts, right? Law took care of that. And the job of a frame is to protect the artwork. Okay, that's it, nothing else. I say back of the frame tells its own story. It's a lesson that I have learned over and over and over and over the years, where I sold a piece of artwork to someone, and then somebody else 10 years later goes to their house and go, "Wow, I really like that. Who's the artist?" And then they take it up, look in the back and see my contact information there, and boom, I move another piece. I'm gonna go back to that in a minute here, but a couple of other things. One thing that the art fairs did is they bring a lot of new younger collectors. And as Jordan would testify to, 99.9% of them look at the artwork, because they're walking the whole fair. They look at the label, they photograph the label and the artwork, and then they go back, keep walking around, Googling the artist to see if, so there's some sort of a weird legitimizing process that goes on depending on what your digital footprint looks like. And that last one in there, most of all, because the IRS has its own legal definition of what's an artist, in case any of you are taking a tax deduction on materials or the percentage of your home that you use as studio, blah, blah, blah. There's pretty interesting laws that work in there. I also have the bit there about the award giving committee perspective, which brings me to the DC art scene, because I pretty much every other year when I'm too tired to do it or whatever, Washington DC has something called the Arts Bank, which they started about maybe 20 years ago. And it's a way to add artwork to the city collection. And it's open not just to Washington, D.C. artists, but what they qualified as the greater DC area, which is actually on a map. There is, it's circled. It's usually within 50 miles of Washington, D.C. in any direction. By the way, if I might meander a little bit, the term DMV for District, Maryland, and Virginia, in case you people don't know, apparently I invented that. Watch me do this to my head. I wasn't aware of that until the Washington City paper did a few years ago, did an article researching that term. And they found out that the first time it had ever appeared anywhere was in, I have a blog, which hopefully you people folks are aware of. It's called Daily Campello Art News, and it's been around since 2002, I think. And it appeared there way back. And the reason it appeared there was that I was telling DC artists, hey, the city just, I'm working from memory here, but I think the post was like, the city just started to buy artwork for its own collection, because I've been hammering Washington, DC for not having such a collection. It's going to be open to artists, and this is where it came from the District, Maryland, and Virginia. And then in parents, I put DMV. Now, the reason that popped up, the DMV thing, normally you would just say Greater Washington or DMV, is pretty silly, but it goes to show you about coincidences and things. I was driving home, and there was a news story about some firefight in the DMZ in Korea, right? Okay, so that's planted in the back of your head. Then I was in my studio, also known as the laundry room, in our house, and I was framing something, and I was listening to the radio, because this was pre-Alexa time, and they were talking, and there was a song by Run DNC. Later on, I was posting, and somehow in the back of my head, DMZ and DNC melded into DMV, and there you go. My son says, hey, Dad, nobody in school believes you. I said, okay, fine. But it's still there, and the city paper said that was it. All right. So Art Bank, the reason that I brought that up, I just finished meandering, so I'm now back to the subject. Meander, if you remember, is those little things that go like this in Greek architecture. The only thing I remember from Greek architecture in art school. But the thing that baffles me is how little is the number of artists that apply when the call goes out for Art Bank entry. It doesn't cost anything, it's free, you do everything online, and yet almost every year for the last 3 or 4 years, the Arts Commissioner says to the selection committee, hey, we have enough funding to buy everything. So if you want to, select everything, that's fine. That has never happened, right? Because the jurors, want to have some sense of an arts in the eyes of the beholder, some sense of jurying something, right? So then a pre-selection is made, and it gets hung at the gallery for the Arts Commission there on I Street. And they pretty much, everything that gets pre-selected ends up being bought because they have enough money. And then you're in the collection of the city. But I want to say that the most we have ever seen is maybe like 56 artists submit. And the thing that bugs me the most is that it's the usual suspect over and over and over and over and over again. And last year, for the first time, the commission said, hey, we have already 12 fill in the blank in the collection. Let's give priority to somebody new. But that was, by the way, my idea years ago. And they said, no, it should be just from the perspective of the artwork. So now they're doing that. So I encourage everyone. I believe the call is out right now for Art Bank. I can't remember when the deadline is. It's in the blog somewhere, DC Art News. So everything that I just said, you can also repeat for the Maryland Commission on the Arts, and you can also repeat for the Mid-Atlantic. So there's 3 calls that I've sat in the process for years and years and years, that to this day, I'm befuddled by the low number of entries. All right, I need to I need to keep an eye on my watch, but I also wanted to talk about arts in the eyes of the beholder, because I always tell artists they need to develop thick skins, because especially if you be in jury. So when I used to sell my art school assignments at the Pike Place Market, the way that it would work is, you could back then you could rent a 10-foot table for $250 a day, and then you were on the other side, and it was based on seniority. So the longer you were there, the closer you got to the inside. Because the last thing you want to do in Seattle, Washington, is to be selling anything when there isn't a roof there, because it does rain every day, right? And artwork and rain don't mix very well. And I would have an art school assignment there, shrink wrap for sale. And it could be something as fabulous as one of my professors had this thing where he would staple objects inside a brown paper bag, and then you're supposed to feel it and draw in charcoal whatever you felt was inside. So you can imagine the monstrosities that came from that. And one of those things could be in there for $10, $20, whatever, for 3 years, and 4,000 or 5,000 people would have looked at it and put it back. And one day somebody would pick it up and go, "Oh my God, I love this." And I would be on the other side of the table thinking to myself, why? And but I learned, that art isn't the eyes of the beholder. So when that juror turns your work down, it's not because he doesn't like you or whatever. That artwork just doesn't appeal to him or her. So that's, I think, a good lesson. But please, everyone that's here, if you're not aware of it, look up Art Bank and go online and submit some artwork. That you'll thank me. I want to say a little bit about the collector. I already talked a little bit about the digital footprint, which is important, especially with young collectors. And it's unfortunate, this legitimization of your artistry based on Google and based on internet presence. But it's 21st century. You got to sort of get adjusted to that. Over the years, I think I've classified these collectors correctly. There's the older collectors that still sort of do it whatever the older way was. One of the things that I've never been able to understand why, after having 2 galleries for 20 years, you would have somebody going to the galleries or not go and follow artist A and never buy a piece of artwork. And then you do an art fair in Miami, and then they buy it at the art fair in Miami. So this sort of legitimization that it's taken that interesting angle as well. Younger collectors, they just want to see how many, who you are online. So that's why they photograph, sometimes they don't even photograph the artwork. They just photograph the label, and then they Google you. And I know this because, I've seen it happen tens of thousands of times. And I also get approached as an artist from somebody that go, "Hey, I saw you work at Art Miami, and I'm curious, what else have you got, blah, blah, blah," right? But I not sure. I haven't decided yet whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but nonetheless, it's a thing. So it's not like there's a choice or not to deal with it. By the way, I'm not monitoring chat, but I know that Mariana is. So Mariana, if at any time you need to tell me to answer something, let me know. All right. I deal in a lot of depth with this, but the other thing that I discussed in a lot more depth in the boot camp is this bit about the art dealer, right? And some of those things demand a lot deeper wording and experience that I got here. And this art clinic online is not to discuss this sort of stuff. Probably the stickiest point is that bottom one about prices, because my experience has been that artists historically and using empirical evidence are more often than not the worst judges of learning how to do that. This is a city, one of my pet peeves about the DC Washington art scene. I every time I used to get on the old JJordan show, which he used to have me in there maybe once or twice a year to discuss the art scene, was how, unfortunately for Washington DC, or the DMV, a term that I invented, is how our museums sort of feel, and their curators feel that themselves as national museums. And the thing that I used to say in the JJordan show, and I'll say any other place, that it was easier for a curator from, say, the Hirshhorn to take a cab to Dulles to fly to Berlin to go visit the studio of an emerging artist in Berlin than to take a cab to Adams Morgan or Georgetown or Silver Spring to look at you know, a local emerging artist, because that word, Sam Gilliam once told me that the reason that it took him so long to sort of break into the outside scene is because people always refer to him as a local artist. Great example, by the way. You may not be aware of this, but maybe 12 to 15 years ago, you could pick up Sam Gilliam without any argument, probably the best known, nicest, well-known artist in the DC area. But you could pick up one of his paintings from the 60s, 70s, 80s at Wexler's for about $300. Try to do that now, but it took an outside gallery to bring Sam's amazing work, an LA gallery and a New York gallery, using art fairs to bring his amazing work to the world. And then, good luck trying to buy a Sam Gilliam now, and it couldn't happen to a nicer guy and a better person. The curator is then the DC curator, but in my own experience, my work, with the notable exception of the Katzen Museum at American University, simply because its director and curator is a local person that grew with DC artists, and thanks to the Alper Initiative. And if you're a DC artist and you're not aware of the Alper Initiative, then you need to go to the AU website and dig about it. So Mrs. Alper left American several millions and millions of dollars to fund the art museum at the Katzen in promoting and exposing DC area artists. And they've done a really, really good job. And they also, by the way, this is also free. There's no cost to submit. And I believe their process is a year-long process where you just propose your artwork and stuff like that to them. And on June 11th, I can't recall off the top of my head who the artist is, but on June 11th, there's a couple of shows funded by the Alper Initiative about DC area artists. That digital footprint and that resume, especially again in this area, is there any artist, especially as they're getting towards their senior Jedi sort of stage in life, and they've long passed their Padawan stage. I'm a Star Wars and Star Trek aficionado, have been since the longest time, and I'm going to meander one time because this is a funny story. I was in San Diego one time for the comic book convention, the world's largest comic book convention and science fiction convention and all that. The very first one took place in 1976, and I was there when that one happened too. So anyway, I was driving through Old Town, and there was a bunch of people dressed as Star Wars characters waiting for the little train that takes them to the downtown area. And I knew they were a Star Wars character. It was up, I'm a Star Wars fan. But just to piss them off, I rolled down my window and I yelled, "Hey man, Star Trek sucks!" And they all got so furious. And one guy yelled out, "This is Star Wars, man, get on with it." Anyway, I completely lost track of why I was talking about that. But if you want to be able to be eligible for something really, really fun, like doing a residency in one of the national parks or something, a lot of times, that footprint that you have also counts, and awards and grants and things of that sort, which you can only really sort of get to if you elevate your footprint to the level of being considered kind of not a weekend painter. Nothing wrong being a weekend painter, by the way, or an artist. That's a really derogatory term, which is somewhat fine-tuned, but okay. But if you want to take that next step and spend 6 weeks in Montana painting or drawing, then I suggest that you evaluate the next process in doing that. Okay, now let me go back to this. So if you guys want to go ahead and do any of that, I have absolutely no problem. Somebody wants to email me and find out, "Hey Lenny, I got this question," whatever. I recommend that you read that every day. I don't post with the frequency that I used to, but I still do at least once a day, and I try to share opportunities, things of that sort, and all that. Now, by my clock or watch here, I can be here as long as you guys need me, but I see in the chat that there's 5 things. I haven't looked at them, but are there any questions
Yes.
or anything of that sort?
I think you answered one, but one or two, but to ask you, when is your next boot camp and where? Do you have a schedule already?
I'm working with Prince George's County to do one now.
Okay.
But I haven't got a definite date yet.
Okay.
But that will be available. I put it in my Facebook feed and I put it in DC Art News and all that. I see Felissa has a show with someone else at the Katzen, yes, I believe, and they the area because I focused on that sort. And
I've been having some problems with
the
my.
function of a frame is to protect the artwork, expand, you know, on the artwork. In fact, there's a couple of Frida Kahlo paintings where she glues all kinds of things to the frame. That's where the frame has become part of the artwork. So I'm not referring to that. Other than that, the function of a frame is to protect the artwork. Personally, in my experience, I've seen that it's mostly the more minimalist the frame it is, the better. My second recommendation is work in standard sizes, because then you'll reduce the cost of your frame by like 85%. Standard sizes are, 5x7, 8x10, 11x14, 12x16, 16 by 20, 20 by 24, 30 by 40. Those are American standard sizes. Why? Because frames are already made in that size. They're pre-made. So a 30 by 40 frame, if you were to take a piece of artwork to a framer in DC, the average cost is $200 an hour to make your frame. Will probably cost you probably $200 to have a 30 by 40 frame made. You go to IKEA, you can buy one for $20, right? It's a perfect minimalist frame. Any other, you can go, IKEA is a really outlier how in expensiveness, right? But even frame shops, Moore's, AC Moore's, which I think no longer exists, Michael's, all those places are good sources of frames that are inexpensive in standard sizes. If you're having a show and you work in standard sizes, then you go to Michael's, find a frame that you like, and they have tons of them. A minimalist frame, look at the frame, turn it around, look at the back, see who makes it, write to them and say, hey, what's your retail price? I need 24 frames. Boom. You just bypass the middleman, right? And so this is the kind of stuff that I discussed, these guerrilla tactics on reducing your personally, for years and years and years and years and years, I use very thin black frames. Now I've gone all the way around. I use very thin white frames where everything sort of blends into the background. No, the bisque does not go back to the kiln. Every ceramicist in the world tells me, hey, Lenny, they made special pencils you can draw on and then you can throw it in the kiln. But then it gets all shiny and stuff and it looks, I fix it, but it doesn't go back to the kiln. What kind of palettes in the market do you use to draw on bisque? I use the hard charcoal pencil and either 9H or 10H or whatever graphite, really hard graphite pencils. Okay, that's everything I got as far as questions. Does anybody else have a question?
You talked a lot about Frida and Sam as people that were influential to your art, but if you think about the old masters, who do you strive to go see a show at if you're overseas, or you're looking to see a show by a specific artist? Who are your heroes?
So when I lived in Spain, definitely my heroes were people like El Greco and Goya. And I never forget this lady at the Louvre, of all places, who told me, he said, the good thing about the Louvre is they got some of the greatest masters in here. The bad thing is you have to look at 50,000 minor French painters before you get to the really good ones. And he says, and then she said, go to go to Madrid and and go to the museum there, and then there's a room full of Rembrandts and a room full, because it was the museum was built at the time of the Spanish century, right? And I never forget, walking into a room where they have Velázquez Las Meninas, and I was like in awe. So I would think, I consider that the greatest painting of the 20th of the 15th century. I think he painted it in 1502, so that's technically the 16th century. But everything is in there, right? 360 degrees, social commentary, the artist in the painting the thing, the king and queen, and then they're reflected in a mirror. The heir to the throne of Spain is holding a ring because she's next in line. Then a boy was born and they painted it over. So which 300 years later caused Spain to change the succession law. So it's the firstborn, not the first male. So every powerful thing that art can deliver is encompassed in the greatest painting, I think, in Western civilization. So the Prado is like, anyway, that answers the question. I would say Velázquez, Diego Velázquez.
We have a question by Michael Janis. Hi, Michael. Good to see you, I think. I don't know if I can actually see you. The art shows are both expensive and rather draining in energy. How do you choose which shows to do?
So you mean like how to get into it because of the price?
I think it's more or less like, which ones do you bother with?
I'm sorry. My wife was whispering at the same time. Sorry. Can you repeat that?
Why do you choose the art shows that you do? Or the art fairs, I mean. I'm interpreting. He can actually chirp in too.
Oh, okay. So
yourself and ask.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So I started in 2005, sort of at the bottom, and then we've been climbing our way up. So there's 22 in Miami. If anybody wants thinking about an art fair or the gallery and art fair, please email me so I can tell you which ones to avoid.
Okay.
So I choose them based almost like on how respected they are, right? And that changes and goes up and down. Like the Scope Art Fair is to be among the hardest. I tried for years in the early 2000s to get into that, got rejected many times. And now, they're not what they once were. So that is a choice. There's the Affordable Art Fair I've been doing since 2005. There's a lot of galleries that have the nose up in the air that tell me, Lenny, yeah, I love that fair. And it's my best-selling fair, but I don't like the name, affordable. So, it's so silly. I know of at least 4 galleries that have established a second online presence under another name so they can do the Affordable Art Fair and still do the other art fairs, under the other name. It's so stupid, right? But anyway, that's the way that the art world sometimes run.
Do you see any changes or behavioral changes to artists or art galleries, art fairs, whatever, in the, I guess, current COVID era? I don't want to say post-COVID, but just how has the art world reacted to COVID in your impressions?
So 2020 died, right? All the art fairs were canceled. Since then, I have participated in 3 art fairs, and Michael Janis can testify to this. When we did Pulse in 2019, it's like, it's Miami, right? But it's like COVID had never happened. It was, everybody was, in my last art fair here in New York, even in this quote unquote spike, everybody seemed to be like, so I think that that hasn't really had that deep lasting impression. Now, more important than that is the terrible state of finances and stuff like that, because but I think that economics doesn't affect, this is going to sound a little trippy, it doesn't affect our level of artistry. That economic affects the multi-million-dollar buys kind of stuff, rather than a $2,500 drawing.
Ian, do you have a question?
Yeah, you had a slide where you were talking about galleries, what not to do. Are you a serious artist, et cetera? Could you take a couple minutes and just dive into that slide a little bit more?
Yeah, and again, I spend a lot of time on that when I do the boot camp. So there's in the one not to do things, there's a pretty long and extensive list, which it starts with some social things like do not introduce yourself and try to talk the gallerist into looking at your work in the middle of an opening for another artist. You'll be surprised how often that happens, right? That is like the easiest way to shoot down any chances. You know, you're cutting in when the gallery is super busy, hopefully with people, and you're sort of cutting in somebody else's moment of glory kind of stuff. The other thing is to explore, right? If you're an abstract painter that paints purple dots on a white canvas and the gallery only shows realism, you know, you might want to pass on that gallery. Things like that are some of the things that I discuss, and I have a pretty extensive list. I recommend that you dial into the Bootcamp for Artists. It's things that I've learned as a gallerist, not as an artist, but also as an artist, but as a gallerist over the years. But as you can see, they're kind of like empirical, realistic things that artists commonly make those mistakes over and over. I want to tell everybody I'm here in Stafford, Virginia, in a swim meet. I have to run because my son is up in a little bit and I don't want to miss him. Please feel free to email me if you have a question. And I also want to thank Jordan and Mariana for allowing me to reach into all of you Saturday morning and talk. If I didn't have that, you know me, I'd be here till 3 o'clock today talking. So.
Well, thank you so much, Lenny. It's always a real treat to hear you talk, and we're grateful for your time, and I hope that Anderson wins every one of them.
Yes, right.
Thank you.
And I hope you agree to come back sometime. So.
Oh, anytime. I'll come back next Saturday if you want.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's fantastic. God bless everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Our next meeting will be in 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day. Thank you.